Stepping into 2017, the US-China relationship faces increasing uncertainty and complexity. Relations between the world's two largest economies are entering a new chapter that presents both unprecedented opportunities as well as challenges ahead. Our panelists today will discuss their own experience and share their thoughts on the future of US-Sino relationship and their perspective on how far the relationship has come, and discuss the opportunity and challenges ahead.
So this panel will be moderated by Jerry Nicholsberg, adjunct professor of economics at UCLA Anderson, and he's also a senior economist of our UCLA Anderson forecast. Professor Nicholsberg teaches economics in the MBA program with a focus on Asian economy, and he has also led the Center for Global Management, most recent global immersion course to China. At the UCLA Anderson forecast, he plays a critical role in the economic modeling and forecasting of the national and California economies. He's a regular presenter at the economy conference and is cited in the national media such as Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, LA Times, and Reuters. So please join us and welcome our moderator and panelists.
In this panel, in this next 50 minutes, we're going to talk about something that's critical for all of our business interests with respect to the US and China, and that's the relationship between our two countries. Before the election, during the campaign, we had some very aggressive rhetoric, and after the election sort of settled down, and then there was this period of time when President Trump and President Xi didn't talk until there was an agreement to go forward with the notion that both countries agreed on the One China policy. We had a love-in at Mar-a-Lago, so things look like maybe they're trending a different direction. But it is really important to try and bring out what our experiences have been, how we think about this, how we use it to evaluate risk going forward in making business decisions. And we're really fortunate to have this panel with us today. The way in which we're going to do this is I'm going to just very briefly introduce each panelist. You have their bios, and their bios are both extensive and impressive in your packet. But then each one is going to talk a little bit about what they do and about kind of what they are seeing at present. And then we'll open to some discussion amongst us about where things are going, how that affects risks and opportunities, and what sorts of things should we be looking at. So let me start with Stephen Chung. Stephen is president of the World Trade Center Los Angeles, formerly was on Eric Garcetti's staff, was with the ports of LA, has this deep background in Los Angeles and Los Angeles trade, and is a Bruin, and studied psychology, which is what you really need for this topic. So let's start with Stephen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, what the World Trade Center does, and about the U.S.-China relations as you see it from your perspective.
So the World Trade Center Los Angeles is a nonprofit organization right here in Los Angeles County. We are part of the Los Angeles County Economic Development Corporation. So you can think of us as the international trade arm for LA County. A lot of companies coming into the US, especially in Los Angeles, they get a bit lost. So a quick question for the audience. Do you guys know the difference between Pacific Palisades, Hollywood, West Hollywood, North Hollywood, Marina Del Rey, and Los Angeles City? Which one's the city? Which one's the neighborhood? Which one's LA County Incorporated? And what does it mean when you need to get your permits? Right? A lot of people in this room, they don't know. Can you imagine a company coming in from a foreign country trying to figure that out? That's our job at the World Trade Center. We try to make sure that these foreign companies, especially from our largest trading partners, including China, when they get here, they have a source to go to. They can work with a nonprofit organization that's not going to charge them any fees to give them the consultation that they need. So in summary, that's basically what we do. There are many other layers. We also promote LA. As you can imagine, global competition has become more and more stiff. Prior to this position, I was working for the city of Los Angeles for 8 years, worked under Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Villaraigosa before that. And we would do international trade missions around the world. And oftentimes, a city like us, when we go, it's difficult because a lot of the local community, they feel like when your elected officials go traveling, they're going on vacation, so they don't like that. But when, in fact, you really need to have your elected officials go represent, put the best face forward to attract investments. When we go, for example, to China, we usually would arrive in Shanghai or Beijing to find out that Austin, Texas was there just the day before us. Maine was there, Missouri was there. And we haven't been to China in 2 years when they're there on every 3-4 months. So the competition is very strong, and that's what we're trying to do as well at the World Trade Center, to really promote Los Angeles and give them the true fact that international investors really know that LA is actually the location they really need to invest. Because one, we have the largest county economy in the nation, $664 billion in our GDP. If we were a country, we would be the 19th largest economy in the world, LA County alone. We have 10.2 million people living here. We have the #1 container port, #2 container port, controls 43% of all ocean-going cargo coming into the United States. We have the #1 origin destination airport in the United States. Why invest anywhere else? Just come to LA. That's my message. That's what we do. I guess you can call me the promoter, the cheerleader for Los Angeles. So those are the two major fronts that I work on. And in terms of why China and the future of China, look, China's been our largest trading partner for the last decade, and it's been growing. And the reason why LA is doing so well economically really is because of international trade. Last year, if you look at our customs district, all the imports and exports that's going through this region, it's now at a level of $450 billion in two-way trade. And our #1 trading partner, China, over 30%, $150 billion in two-way trade. So our vitality of this economy, our future, and our past as well, it's really directly linked to China. The better they do, the better we do. The better we do, the better they do. So for Los Angeles, we really need to make sure that this relationship, not just from the business side, but also from the collaboration aspect, from the cultural aspect, from the education aspect, need to be fully linked together. The #1 and #2 economy, they cannot be divorced from each other. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And our next panelist is Anthony Tony Dolim. And Tony is also a Bruin, 2001 MBA, and has spent a career in residential construction with, amongst others, Pardee Homes. He is CFO of Landsea Corporation, and so in addition to investing and developing in homes, it's international investing and developing in homes. So why don't you take it away, Tony, and
Sure.
Talk a bit about Landsea.
Sure. First, as a sponsor of the event, Landsea is very honored to be here and to participate in this, and we really want to thank Mr. Wu and the dean and Lucy and the student organizers who created such a great event. It's really an honor to be here. So I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Landsea Holdings Corporation. Landsea Holdings Corporation is based here in Irvine, headquartered in the US, and we're a wholly owned subsidiary of a company called Landsea Group, which is headquartered and based in China. Landsea Group is about a 15-year-old company that focuses in residential home building for sale housing in China. And in their short 15-year life, they've become a top 50 home builder in China. And the niche, it's a privately owned enterprise. The niche is to focus on green building, sustainable technology, and creating healthy homes for their clients. As with many companies based in China, they've seen a need to diversify their asset base and make investments outside of China, and became very attracted to investing in the US. And so Landsea Holdings Corp represents their investment in the U.S. They've provided us with a significant capital base to go out and grow the business. Our company here started about 3 years ago, and it's grown from 0 to almost 700 million in assets over that period of time. We focus on residential for sale development here as well, and we do it, we compete in the U.S. markets. We like the West Coast, Northern California, and Southern California, as well as the East Coast, New York, Boston areas. And we do a combination of suburban style phased residential development along with high-rise style development, which is more on the East Coast. Through our business here, we interact with a lot of joint venture partners, equity partners, banks, and other firms that do cross-border investment and capital flows between the U.S. and China. My view on the U.S.-China relations and how they stand now is that from the U.S. perspective, I think it's really underappreciated. I think there's a lot of focus on, in the media and so forth, about the negative aspects, and in fact, some jobs have moved from the U.S. to China. But what I don't think it really fully crystallizes is the amount of opportunity and jobs it creates in the U.S., both through foreign direct investment here, like Landsea, as well as for U.S. businesses to invest in China or to sell goods in China because of the huge and rapidly growing middle class there. Just as an example of job creation, at Landsea we've got about 100 employees now, but we implement EB-5 financing, which is a pathway where Chinese and other overseas investors can place money in the U.S. As long as it creates jobs under a certain formula, they have a path to a green card. Under that program, we've raised about 200 million of EB-5. Under that program, that's created about 4,000 jobs here in the U.S. So the multiplier effect of foreign direct investment in the U.S. is very beneficial. And I think that's understated or not well known. In terms of fostering the relationship going forward, I think both sides have challenges. I think in China, it really relates to trying to maintain the economic growth that's been occurring. I think there's political factors in China and reforms that have been ongoing that impact capital flows going both ways. And those reforms can be at risk if the economy starts to slow and the population becomes less content with their wealth and their fortunes. So that's a potential challenge. They need to continue to increase transparency and keep a level playing field for companies investing in China to encourage that sort of bilateral relationship. Here on the U.S. side, again, I think it's a matter of educating people as to the benefits, as I discussed, of the bilateral relationship, and to try to get away from the demonization of the relationship and the negative aspects of it, and really just educate people on the full benefits and hope that there's some progress there with our administration and how that perception may change from when it was on the campaign trail. And so I think there's tremendous potential there, and groups like this, universities, business councils, things like that really help to educate people and improve that relationship. The potential for the relationship is so tremendous, and how much it's growing on both sides, that I think it's just in all of our interest to find ways to create and foster an environment that really lets bilateral investment thrive.
Great, and I want to come back to that, in particular as it relates to the recent initiatives on steel. So that's a question that's coming up, but do want to thank you on behalf of UCLA Anderson and the Wu Conference for Landsea being a sponsor. That's just so important in putting on these events.
Sure. Yeah.
Our next panelist is Fiona Howe, and she is not a Bruin, but did graduate from Peking University, which, as many of you know, is one of the most prestigious universities in all of China. When we've gone out there with global immersion classes, we always go to lectures at Peking University. And she is head of marketing with UnionPay USA, and after graduating, she was posted in Shanghai, and then in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia and Vietnam, and to the U.S. came to California, then to New York, and was telling me, came back to California, which makes good sense to me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about UnionPay US and how that relates to tourism, which is, I mean, Chinese tourism in California is extremely important.
Yes, of course. So I want to say it's a great honor to sit with Reborn today on this stage. And so as anyone that has lived in China for some time, you probably heard about UnionPay. In Chinese, it's called Yulian. So we're a credit card organization in China. We always call us like the Chinese Visa. We're just like Visa, MasterCard here in the US. We work with the banks to issue cards to the public. So as of end of last year, we issued more than 5 billion cards around the world. So in terms of the card in circulation around the world, we're the largest in this in the whole world right now. Just surpassed Visa last year. So UnionPay was established in 2002 in Shanghai, and we started to do our international business in 2004. And in 2005, we came to the US market, and we partnered with Discover Network. Basically, we open our network to each other, so a UnionPay card can be used in the US as a Discover card, and the US Discover card can be used in China as a UnionPay card. That's how we started the business. But now we're also partnered with Alavon and a couple of other big processors in the US to expand our network here in the United States. Also, starting from last year, we worked with ICBC US and issued our first UnionPay credit card in the United States. So in the future, anyone that wants to travel back to Asia, especially to China, I would suggest you to apply for UnionPay card at ICBC. That will definitely help your trip in China.
Great, thank you. So let's kind of turn to the central theme here, which is where we are today, and maybe all of us can talk about what your experience is with the Chinese counterparties who are looking to come to the U.S. as tourists or for trading or for foreign direct investment, and how that has changed over, say, the last 6 months to a year, if it has. So who would like to take that away first?
Don't look at me.
I'll start. So,
Sure.
As I mentioned, we partner with multiple different types, insurance companies, private equity companies, real estate operators who right now I think have a strong demand to place capital in the US. And I think it's been strong and it remains strong. I'm sure driven substantially by currency and the direction that's gone over the last 6 months, although it's starting to stabilize. It's great. I mean, it's a great source of capital. There's differences that we need to come to in terms of their view on how to structure deals versus our view on how to structure deals, but we can work through those. What's made it challenging most recently have been the currency controls in place in China, and the inability to get money out of China. So we've dealt more with partners who have money available in Hong Kong and so forth. So we have to find ways to work around those things as needed. But again, I think the demand is still very strong, and there's a great appetite to do those kinds of investments.
I think if you look at the past few years of trend, right? If you look at the Rhodium Group reports, it stated that combined from 2000 to 2016 altogether, they just surpassed over $100 billion in investment coming in from China. And over the last 2 years, there's been a significant change. So the total amount of investment coming from China was, I think, about $15 billion in 2015, and 2016 was $46 billion. That's a huge jump. So we were kind of trending towards that direction as well, because there are a lot of projects being lined up, especially here in the West Coast. LA and California has been a huge recipient of that foreign direct investment. So just counting projects that we've seen around here. Shanghai Greenland, $1.3 billion in downtown LA. Next door, Shenzhen Hazen, $700 million. Down the street from there is Oceanwide from Beijing, another $1.3 billion. This is not including some of the other projects that are just being developed as well, including Lanxi, Wanda, Shenlong Properties. So a lot of real estate investments. Then you also have Wanda with Legendary Pictures deal, $3.5 billion. You have WeChat investing into, not WeChat, the parent of WeChat, Tencent, investing into Riot Games and Activision Blizzard. BYD opening operations. So from technology, industrial space, real estate, it's been happening. I do agree with Tony that there's the currency restriction has slowed down a little bit. I think that's going to be over time. It's probably going to settle a little bit. So I still think there's going to be a very positive future for us.
But that's affected some of the deals, like the Vizio deal and some of the others, right?
Yes, and I'm hoping this is the part where we can't predict what's going to happen next, but we're hoping that this will be a temporary pause, that over time, over the next 2 years or so, things will go back to the upward trajectory.
And what are you seeing in the way of tourism? So you see the financial side of tourism, which is sort of critically important in terms of economic growth in our leisure and hospitality industry here.
Yes, of course. So in the past 5 years, I would say almost everything changed in this game. And so in 2007, I think there were only 700,000 visitors from China to the US. And right now it's more than 4 times back in 2007. And also right now, as let's see a statistic for the end of last year, the average spend of every Chinese customer is about $7,000 per trip. So that creates at least $14 billion US spending here in the United States. And let alone all the Chinese students that we have a lot of them here today. So we had an estimate in 2015, there were like $9 billion US that was spent by the Chinese students here in the United States. So we can see this number has been growing at least double digits every year for the past 5 years. And also we see, just talk about the tourists. We've been seeing the shifting from the tour groups to more FIT tourists, more the free independent travelers. And as in 2006, after the 10-year visa was issued to the Chinese citizens, we're seeing more and more people after their first trip, maybe coming with the tour groups, and then the second trip will come with their friends, and they just book the flights and hotels online through Expedia, etc. And then just rent a car. So we see this trend shifting to FIT, and also we see our transactions shifting from offline to online. We see a lot more cross-border e-commerce transactions than ever. Amazon US, Amazon Japan. Not the Chinese customer don't only purchase from Amazon China website. They purchase from Amazon everywhere. And also we see a lot of changes in the mobile payment. UnionPay now is partnered with Apple Pay, Android Pay, and Samsung Pay. So we work with most of the mobile payment networks. So we facilitate more transactions through their mobile phone. So a lot of changes.
So this is more a reflection not of residential patterns, but of patterns of tourist arrivals then?
Yes.
If I can add to the tourist aspect, Fiona is absolutely right. We've been seeing an enormous growth, especially here in the LA market. A lot of Chinese visitors, when they come to the United States, they stop somewhere, and LA is usually the first stop. And in 2006, LA City actually opened the first tourism office in Beijing. We're the first city to open the official tourism office. And we were thrilled back then. 150,000 Chinese visitors a year, and we were just celebrating. Just last year, we're the first US city to surpass 1 million Chinese visitors a year. And with the spending habits of the Chinese visitors is really driving this market, and that's why South Coast Plaza is having these special deals specifically for Chinese visitors, and now Beverly Center is going after that same market. So it's really transforming the way that we're doing things. Now, you asked about the current state. One of the, we're talking this rosy picture, but we also have certain challenges. As our administration has instituted some more restrictive measure when it comes to travel, there are a lot of questions about who might be able to come in and who might be restricted. I don't think the Chinese clientele are targeted right now, but one of the issues is basically as they're getting through TSA, if their phones are going to be checked and they're required to provide their password, and there's certain information that they don't want to share, this is limiting some potential investors or business clients that might want to come to this market for travel. They might just select to go to, I don't know, Canada or Mexico instead of the United States. So we're watching this very closely. We're hoping that's not going to affect us too much, but this is definitely of concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, are you seeing some of that, Tony, in your potential investors of more wariness because of the travel ban? And
I wouldn't say we've seen it in our business so much. We have financial investors whose motivations are purely investment, financial performance. We do sell probably 25% of our homes to overseas buyers, but it's again substantially from China, and we have cooperation with our parent company and their sales team there, and so it's really not the travel ban per se hasn't really impacted us in that, I would say.
So what do you all think is the most worrisome thing today that people in business who are looking at these cross-border transactions, whether it's investment or tourism or trade, ought to be thinking about, and maybe what kind of data should they be looking at to see where things are going? Any thoughts on that?
I think instability for investors are always going to be a challenge, not knowing whether there might be a potential tariff that will be issued against a certain country. So that's definitely going to be the negative factor. But as the promoter of Los Angeles, again, I have to say you have to look at the history as well. LA has been working together with China since the 1800s. So we've gone through many waves of there's certain discrimination against certain groups. Asian Americans were part of that group before, but we've gone through that wave, and we've actually done very well. And I think you see LA actually absorbs and celebrates that diversity. And that's why I think LA should and will be the shining beacon of the paragon of what international cities should be like. Our LA Mayor, Eric Garcetti, just gave his State of the City speech yesterday. And in his speech, he made it very, very clear that LA will continue to welcome everybody to this city, whether it's for tourism or for investments. In fact, Discover LA Tourism Convention Board just released a brand new video recently online. You guys should really check it out. It's a fantastic video. And it's just a very simple video about welcoming everybody, different background, different diversity. This is the heart of LA, and I think this is a message that we want the international community to know. Despite what the national trend might be, LA stands alone. Again, because of our economy, because of who we are, we'll continue to welcome international visitors.
I agree with that tremendously, and I would even expand it beyond LA to California as a whole in terms of being open and welcoming, and also not just to visitors and tourists, but to investment. And I think one of the slides we saw in the earlier presentation showed, of all of the new foreign direct investment that's coming in, that's now $46 billion, a lot of that came to California. And I think that environment is there, and it's welcoming. California has so many advantages in terms of its economic base now, and even to people buying homes and knowing that chances are it's going to go up in value over time as opposed to other parts of the country. It's a great investment, and so that's a tremendous positive. And the risk is that the relationships between the two countries at the government level, maybe if they were to go awry, and that was to start to create protectionist policies on both sides, that interferes with that relationship and doesn't let it become what it can become.
I want to add something to the visa policy that we just discussed. Actually, I think that will definitely create some uncertainty to the U.S.-China relations, especially for the tourism part. Because we've started to see, starting from this year, to see some big incentive groups, we call it MICE groups, as getting more rejection of applying the tourism visa to the United States. So we work very closely with very large groups, and then we assume that they're just bringing more business to the United States, but we've seen a lot more decline than before. So I think that will definitely create some uncertainty to this whole environment. And also the currency exchange rate. As the US dollar grows stronger and stronger, our customer has an option to go to US or Europe, especially after Brexit. Everybody goes to London to shop. It becomes so cheap, so much cheaper than before. So there are a lot of things that might change, the visitors, the amount of visitors, the amount that they're going to spend here in the United States in the next few years.
Yes, so let's talk about the exchange rate. We've talked a little bit about capital controls and how that's kind of putting a damper on flow of funds. But during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump said that on day one, he was going to declare China a currency manipulator. We got 2 more zeros behind that one, and it hasn't happened, and possibly because he was informed that it's true, but that's because it's manipulated into a stronger rather than weaker renminbi. But you don't know what can happen if China's declared a currency manipulator. What happens to the exchange rate, and how does that affect kind of our view of cross-border transactions and cross-border risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think if, right now the exchange rate seems to have stabilized a little bit, and I think it is because of those currency controls, and hopefully that gives everybody some breathing room, and when there's cooperation on other geopolitical issues, everybody can take a step back and try to approach the relationship in a more thoughtful manner, maybe a more predictable manner, hopefully. But that risk is always there, and you'll see if it starts to go the other way again, you'll see again more desire for diversification of assets out of China into the U.S., which again increases investment here and has certain benefits. But it's you'd like to see in any business environment, of course, just a more predictable, stable environment so people can make big investment decisions. That's when things are moving all over the board and currency rates and policies and potential tariffs. It's hard as a business person to go in and make a big investment or a big capital commitment, and that again just has a dampening effect on things.
I worry a bit more about the macro perspective. So if the U.S. does file with the WTO that China's a currency manipulator, that process is going to take a while for it to go through. So I don't think there's going to be an immediately shockwave that's going to go through immediately. However, I don't think the Chinese government is going to sit idly by if we take such an aggressive stance of going to the global stage and basically calling them out for currency manipulation. And the question is basically what is the retaliation? Is it going to come in the form of tariff increase, trade barriers, restricted access for U.S. investors going into China, and vice versa? So the other thing we have to look at is on day one of the administration, withdrew from TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So 11 countries were negotiating for 7 years. We walked away from that really big trade deal with 40% of the GDP of the world. China immediately stepped in, negotiating very aggressively with the other countries that are there. They're moving forward with their regional comprehensive economic plan, the RCEP, and the other trade agreement that's around that region. This is really going to shape the future of trade policies for the Asia Pacific, with ASEAN country growing so quickly. So it's a multiple layer effect, that currency manipulation filing, if that does happen. So it's, in my mind, if that does happen, it's really going to destabilize the entire global economy, I feel.
So that brings me back to steel. So at least the reports are, well, the reports are that the president has asked the Commerce Department to study steel as a national security industry, with the implication that restrictions are going to be put on steel, and sort of the focus is really on China, although we don't import a lot of steel from China. And so this kind of has a couple of there are a couple of questions here. One is how would the Chinese retaliate, because it is a negotiation, and the other party doesn't sit idly by while you take action, right? Particularly not the Chinese government. But the second question, and this comes back to, Tony, what you were saying about, yes, there's a trade deficit, but it's got a counterbalancing foreign direct investment. So the impact of this is going to be the price of steel is going to go up. How are you all thinking about that in terms of your building it? That'll increase maybe not the cost of building single-family homes in Sunnyvale,
right,
but your
our
multifamily homes back east.
Right, or our high-rise for-sale developments on the East Coast are completely constructed of steel. It's the biggest single component in those, and so it's a huge risk on the cost side, and one that you want to try to find ways to mitigate. Those projects, you have to build the whole project to the top and finish it off, and then you can close and sell homes. There's a 2 or 2.5 year window of exposure there, and so you're taking a lot of risk. And that's why I say that those kinds of uncertainties in relations between the two countries are just very difficult for the U.S. business environment to deal with. And
so maybe more steel workers and fewer construction workers.
Right, right.
But what about this and sort of other products, if it's going to be done on a one-off basis? Any insights or guesses as to how the Chinese government will react to U.S. trade policy that is aimed at restricting Chinese exports to the U.S.?
This is the thing. I think we're focused on this administration right now, but don't forget that the Obama administration actually increased tariff on Chinese steel by 498% just 2 years ago. We're still trading with them. So I think the friction with other countries in terms of trade is going to happen, and I think we should look at it from the long view. I think it will settle down a little bit. I think we do have to give this administration some time to work through the differences and understand the complexity of international negotiations. I think this administration is learning very quickly, and we've seen the adjustment, which is a very, very good thing in Mar-a-Lago. The fact that the very next day, the administration came out and said China's not a currency manipulator, taking that huge 180 turn. I just don't think that things are going to come together the way that we're afraid it's going to be based on the campaign promises and the campaign discussions.
So take us through that a little bit. What was the response of China to the previous increases in tariffs? And those were all dumping cases. Right?
Yeah. So obviously there are disagreements from the policy level, but the thing is, again, when you look at the trend and overall, we're still $46 billion coming into the United States from China and back and forth. And again, there are other products we're still buying from China. So Walmart, Home Depot, JCPenney, really those beneficial cargo owners based in Arkansas and Georgia, they won't survive without the trading relationship with China, because that's our business model. So just because one product is particularly targeted, I'm not concerned. What I'm concerned is basically a cross-border tariff. If it's going to be a strict across the board, a 20-40% increase for any product that's coming from China or from Mexico, that becomes a huge concern for us, because it's one size-fit-all policy doesn't really work for our current structure of our economy.
And I want to add something about the tariff issue as well. I think it's a problem for both sides. And also for our credit card business, on top of everyday cap, there used to be a 10,000 RMB per day cash withdrawal. That was the limit. Mm-hmm. Now, on top of that, every year we have $100,000 RMB limit per card. So that just came up last year. There are a lot more new restrictions coming out in the recent years. So a lot of things have changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. There's always going to be these kinds of little bumps in the road as we go along. I think as we stand today, I think the risk of a full-scale set of issues is lower than it was maybe we thought it was in December. Mm-hmm. The risk side of it, you asked the question, well, what if we put a tariff on there? What's going to be the response? And we shouldn't forget, a third of our exports go to China as well. And we export high dollar value goods, cars, things like that, to China that have a big impact within our economy. So there is sort of that exposure that if you did get into that trade war scenario and it ends up being across the board tariffs, it has impacts on both sides, as Fiona mentioned.
Yeah, something that South Korea is experiencing now, that they're exporting goods to be finished and re-exported back to South Korea and interrupting those complex supply chains.
Right.
But it sounds like what y'all are saying is that, yes, these will be bumps in the road, but commerce will find a way. So that's a very upbeat view of the future. We also have to think about the downside. So what would you say is maybe the biggest risk facing someone who is interested in how the relationship between the two countries is going to impact business?
From my perspective, I think it's going to be the security aspect that's going to, the geopolitical perspective, whether it's North Korea, whether it's South China Seas, that's going to be the thing to watch. I think business is going to be business. I think both economies are so focused on making money that you're going to basically get to the best solution, and there are going to be bumps in the road, but eventually I think our economies are so integrated, I think we're going to be able to withstand it. However, when it comes to national security issues, if there are any geopolitical changes there, whether it's North Korea again, whether it's South China Sea, we can't figure out the island dispute situation, and basically that escalates the hostility between the two countries, that's something we can't walk back from. So from the negative side, that's something that I'm watching very closely. I think all of us should, because it's worrisome.
I think on a related note, one of the major risks, there's a ton of potential for trade between the two, but it relies on both economies performing well. And the ability of the Chinese economy to continue to grow at the rate it needs to grow to support the population and the growth there, and the risk factors that were mentioned in our presentation earlier today are meaningful. I don't think you can ignore those. You have to understand there is some risk to the economy. And if that takes a turn in the wrong direction, I think that obviously has direct trade impacts, but it also can bleed into other political issues and things like that that will affect the business relationship.
I agree with Stefan. I think it's always political issues and security issues that will be the biggest uncertainty. But for my business, the biggest uncertain thing is still the visa policy, I would say. That's what we are not very sure about at this point. And we hope it could go to a very positive way.
And so it's. It seems to me that what you all are saying is not only watch what's happening in Washington, but watch what's happening in Beijing, and to see that those are aligning and as opposed to pulling apart. So we only have a few minutes left, and we have a lot of students here in the audience. So maybe each one of you could tell them, based on your experience and kind of the way your career has gone, give them some advice if they're interested in international trade or international investment careers.
So one thought is this, if you look at when President Trump took office, one of the first engagement with China that he had was not with the government, was with Jack Ma and Alibaba. So as the MBA students, as the students that are here, business is actually a very good way to develop diplomacy. Using business, and if you look back a little bit, I talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Secretary Penny Pritzker, Secretary Kerry, all of them were saying basically TPP is the future for us because it actually is the best way of us to develop our security, national security. A trade agreement is the basis for national security because if you're trading with the other countries, it actually gives them additional incentive not to be hostile with each other. So for the MBA students that are here, it's not just business. What you do in the future can potentially be that bridge and that gap to work out the difference between two countries. So do business. Make sure that you guys are open-minded and make sure that to understand that there's a solution. It's not, we don't always have to escalate so quickly and make a definitive stance. There are always nuances and there are bumps in the road, but the thing is, look at the long view. It can help us. So please help us because we need all the help we can to de-escalate any potential, nationalistic kind of sentiment. Again, LA, California, and the United States, we are who we are because of our diversity. As an immigrant from Hong Kong, being accepted here and being able to live here, this is what makes me feel so passionate about our democracy and about our country. And this can't happen without the international cooperation. We speak 224 different languages right here in LA. LA is the most diverse location in the history of humankind. Help us make sure that LA becomes that example so that we can show the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. International trade, international collaboration, diplomacy is a good thing. War, not so much.
Can't disagree with that. Yeah, I guess just from a career standpoint, I'm sure everybody who's here, getting an education at this fine institution is very ambitious, has probably some very specific career goals that they have in mind. And I think just being deliberate about how you manage the environment, like we've talked about, there's just so much potential in any given industry, or the international business side is we've been saying it for years, it's growing, we're seeing it grow right before our eyes. And so for you as students with MBAs looking to establish a career, I think the key is don't be shy about using the skills that you have to make yourself valuable to the right organization. If you do that, you get yourself put into situations where you're participating, you're being relied on, you can show off your skills, and it'll be to the benefit of you and your career as you manage it going forward. If it happens to be that you're bilingual, that's great. If it happens to be an expertise in a particular subject matter that's valuable to a company that's entering business in that area, that's great too. Whatever it is, just don't be shy about trying to make yourself valuable within the organization you choose to work for.
Yeah, and Fiona, so you come at this from the other side, having left China and come to the U.S.
Oh, yes, of course. And actually, if you're into the international business, based on you just introduced my background, I've worked in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, Cambodia, and then LA, San Francisco, New York. My suggestion is try to visit as many countries as you can, talk to the local people, and experience multiple cultures, and then if you have the chance, try to work in as many countries as you can when you're young. It will definitely help you when you're doing the international business in the future.
Yeah, I would agree with all of what you said in recommendations, not just for MBAs, but no matter where you are in your career. And that was kind of the theme of Commerce will kind of sort of triumph, and our U.S.-China relations, innovation, competition, and collaboration. We need to understand both sides to do the international business successfully. And I've had a number of my students who bought one-way tickets to China or Southeast Asia, and very successfully. So we could talk about this subject for a long time, but we are out of time. So I want to thank each of you for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. And please join me in thanking them.